Hello, everybody. This is your old friend Brian Hunt, and welcome to another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. Today is we are in the month of December, getting ready for the end of the year, and by this time, I want to have a great conversation, and I'm going to bring in a guest that I think has a lot to say. So, a lot of you watching this might be in real estate development and construction, and hopefully everything goes well exactly the way you want it to. Hopefully, all the contracts are great. You pick a great general contractor, subcontractors, you've got great engineers and designers, and everything goes smoothly. But unfortunately, you and I, everybody here knows that sometimes things go wrong. And as a result, you submit a claim to the carrier. Some things are cut and dry, but sometimes be a little gray as far as the wording or the actual incident involved and who's responsible, who's not. And sometimes when you need a lawyer, an attorney is going to advocate on your behalf when it comes to construct defect. And so I thought it'd be a great opportunity to bring my friend Marc Gravely talk about what a design defect can look like in construction, the issues that might pop up. He's one of the leading attorneys in this area, and also he's got a book he's written about America's infrastructure we're going to talk about as well. So at this time, I'd like to introduce my good friend Marc Gravely of Gravely PC. Marc, welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Good. So I believe if in the old adage of the game, where is Carmen Sandiego? So where is Marc Gravely today?
So I'm at the Bel Air Hotel in Beverly Hills.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. And what brings you to Los Angeles or Beverly Hills?
Oh, a potential client.
Okay. And I imagine it's a potential client and maybe had an issue on a construction project or something went wrong, unfortunately.
Something along those lines. There's a lot of construction going on, and nothing's perfect, of course.
No.
And it's such an art and a science, and there's a lot going on these days in the construction world.
Yeah, and I think, Marc, that's a great set where I wanted to bring you on because obviously things have been going gangbusters for, especially like in Dallas, where you're from, and then Los Angeles, and there's everybody's doing construction everywhere. And now that we've got the infrastructure bill, which we'll talk about in the book, a lot more for the construction to be happening over the course of the coming years. And so, as we like to say, a lot of dirt's being moved and a lot of walls going to be ripped out. And hopefully everything goes well in these projects, but sometimes they go wrong. And that's really what I talk to you about, what construction defect insurance looks like and some of the pros and cons. But before we get far down the road, Marc, let's talk a little about your background as far as, where are you from originally?
Well, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and moved to Texas to go to law school at St. Mary's in San Antonio. And I graduated in 93, seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
And I started working right off the bat for a firm that did architects and engineer defense work.
Okay.
So I learned the ins and outs about, design, mechanical, stuff like that.
So I'm curious, before you joined the firm, did you have any experience in construction whatsoever? Family do it whatsoever?
Nope, none whatsoever. I had to have a job, and that's just where I, happened to catch on. I studied biology in college. And I always thought I'd go to medical school or something like that. But, I wasn't a great student and wasn't super focused sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a lot of times. And, I was just happy to get a job. So, I never dreamed I would be doing what I'm doing now.
So that's a great analogy because I did construction for a bit, worked for Austin Industries here in Dallas. It was a short time. And I came in and had no prior experience in construction. I'd worked for a large insurance property carrier, FM Global, which I know you're aware of. And I got the sense of far as, engineering and theoretical construction. But when I actually started working for a general contractor, I kind of blew my mind just how many moving parts there are on a project. And there's so many teams and so many organizations or firms involved with it that it's really one big dance to make sure everything is done on time and under budget.
It is, it's pretty crazy. I didn't know much about it either when I started. It's always been amazing to me that, a person with a pickup truck and a shovel can build something wonderful and spectacular, that makes life better for people.
Yeah.
And so, I always like to say construction, it's an art and it's a science, and a whole lot of, human nature thrown in, which is why construction projects are almost always late. It's never surprising.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of moving parts. I agree with you. It's amazing things get done sometimes.
So, Marc, your early stages, you're working for a firm, you're learning about construction defect. I'm curious that early on, what were some of the things that you started seeing that was like, wow, someone should have caught this? Or what were some of the early on your stages? What were some of your horror stories you saw?
Well, nobody calls me unless there's something wrong.
Yeah.
The same has been true, since I started as a lawyer. In the beginning, any architect or engineer, general contractor for that matter, needs to have a lawyer that they know and can depend on to get their documents straight,
Okay.
to make sure they understand what the risks are. And so, the same is true with regard to architects and engineers. I believe that was your question.
Yeah.
So, we do some drafting with the contracts, but the biggest things that go wrong when it comes to architects, surprisingly, it's not typically a true design issue, typically. Because no architect designs something to fail. I mean, nobody wants that, right? Nobody intends.
Yeah.
And so what we see more often is maybe like a failure to coordinate.
Okay.
Subconsultants, failure to communicate directly with the general contractor, failure to issue clear RFIs or responses to RFIs.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd see a lot of that. And sometimes the architect or the engineer just gets caught up in a spat between the owner and the general contractor, because so often in the AI documents, they're supposed to be the go-between.
Yeah. And Mark, I think you make up a great point, which from our point, when we're as an insurance broker and working with our clients, is that people, I don't think, try to understand that insurance policies are not homogeneous in the sense that if something that you get from the Hartford is not necessarily the same from the Zurich or AIA or AIG. Now, they might be using the standard ISO form, but every firm and every contract, I mean, an insurance contract is a legal document. It's written by lawyers, and it determines what's covered and what's not covered. And then the whole concept as far as policies are written and they have endorsements that are added to provide coverage or exclusions to deny coverage, how all that sort of comes into play in the sense that it's critical. And I think this, maybe you're chiming on this, is that people out there sign contracts not necessarily understanding what their policies will cover. And as a result, you have gaps in coverages, and that's where the thing can really go sideways. I mean, would you
That's
agree with
right.
that?
And so I do. And, there's a lot of facets to the idea that you're talking about. My firm only represents owners, project
Okay.
owners. We do not represent general contractors.
Okay.
We do not represent architects. We don't represent engineers. It's only owners.
Got it.
And I think it's important for your audience to know that we only work on a contingency, which means
Okay.
if we accept a case from an owner, they don't have to pay us until there's a resolution. And so the reason I point that out is that it's important to know what insurance is available or not in the event something happens. The easiest example I can give you is a builder's risk policy during during a project.
Yeah.
A lot of times there'll be say a pipe burst on the top floor of a retirement community, and the builder's risk policy is supposed to make the owner whole. And a lot of times the general contractor is the one that kind of controls what happens while working with the insurer with regard to that response. And so my job in that instance is always to maximize what I get the owner, to make sure that the repairs comport with the original contract documents and that the insurance carrier doesn't limit the scope of what really ought to be done.
Mark, you make a great point there. And full disclosure, guys, I've been on the carrier side, I've been on the GC side, I've been on the broker side. And I've sold and placed builder's risks where the general contractor is first name or when the owner is. And there's some pros and cons, and I could argue either side of it. I'm curious, Mark, from your perspective, and you've got someone who's an owner or developer, do you think it makes, and then maybe there's a maybe to this, do you think it makes more sense for the owner to carry the builder's risk or should the general contractor, or is it dependent upon the project?
Well, it doesn't matter who carries it. The owner pays for it, obviously.
Yeah, correct.
And, it typically is or should be a pass-through.
It is,
yeah. It should be, ideally. But the one thing that owners always have to remember is they want to be a named insured, and that's of paramount importance,
okay.
Along with the general contractor, because, the GC, for example, if there's a calamity at a project, the GC hasn't turned it over yet. It's, they're still responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always best practice, I've always done, to make sure the GC and the owner are both named insureds. I've come across a few times where the owner is simply a lost payee, and I never recommend that. And the reason I recommend and really insist that owners are a named insured, it doesn't cost anymore typically.
Yeah, no, really.
Because then the insurance company owes a duty to them, in Texas known as the duty of good faith and fair dealing. And then the insurance company, under the insurance statutes here in Texas, has a duty to do a reasonable investigation. They can't just take what the general contractor suggests the scope is and do it. But if they do it, it's at their own peril. And so the reason is that name on a line on a piece of paper increases the duty the carrier has to the owner, which of course is better for the owner.
Okay. So you make reference to builder's risk, which obviously is kind of a cornerstone for any construction. If there are any owners out there or developers thinking, what other policies or coverages would you say you should look into getting to or making sure this is on your project?
Well, you're the expert in this. I fact, right? I kind of have to play it where it lies.
Sure.
But the biggest thing any project needs, any general contractor needs, is a good solid CGL policy with products completed operations. But they should always carry excess or umbrella coverage, which isn't that much more expensive. And the owner pays for that anyway also.
Mm-hmm.
And it protects both the general contractor and the owner in the event something goes wrong. Remember, nobody calls me unless there's a problem. So, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, from at least I've dealt in the past with owners and developers, there are a couple of products out there that are specific for the protection of the owner if by chance the GC's policies fails. One of them is owner's interest, which I don't think people have any experience when it's the owner acquires the policy. It's strictly in the owner's name. It sits above anything the general contractor has. And if by God something happens, improper wording, fails to react, owner's got separate owner's interest policy that helps them from the perspective of what the general contractor is doing. And then some similar with dealing with engineers, architects, is what's called OPPI, which is sort of the same thing, protects the owner strictly in their name, sits above whatever coverage the architect and engineer has. And again, if something goes wrong with those underlying policies, as we say, it's a belt and suspender sort of protection that the owner's got.
Right. And in this day and age, given all the construction that's happening and the at times shortages of skilled workers, having enough insurance is, you think I'm selling it, but I'm not. It's of paramount importance. I can't stress it enough. These days, what I'm seeing a lot of is architects and engineers don't have enough insurance, and they're putting their personal assets at risk.
Mm-hmm.
I've wrapped up 4 or 5 cases this year where the architect or engineer had to pay money, out of their pocket, not insurance money, on top of what their insurance carrier paid, because they just didn't have enough insurance, and my client wasn't going to settle for whatever insurance they had.
Yeah. I think, Mark, you just hit something right on the head that I would make sure all my people listening to this is that you truly understand what's at risk, your asset, your company size, your balance sheet. And if something goes wrong, do you have enough coverage to take that hit? Because I tell people all the time, a well-trained monkey could sell you cheap insurance. That's not a problem. The problem is whether or not it's sufficient to meet your needs and protect your balance sheet and isn't going to react if something goes wrong. So I think my always adage is don't go cheap on insurance. You don't want to spend money you don't have to. But the whole purpose there is to protect your balance sheet and make sure your business maintains as a going concern if something goes wrong.
And too, it's important for your listeners to know. The owner pays for it all anyway. And on a $100-200 million project, what's another 25 grand for excess or umbrella coverage? It protects everybody. So it always just blows my mind when I find out somebody who's responsible doesn't have enough insurance.
Man, unfortunately, you're right. Yeah, it could be a lot of sad stories in that situation all around. So, Mark, I'm curious. In the past couple of years, and now in what's going on, what are some of the things that you're getting pulled into? What kind of claims are you seeing? What sort of issues are you seeing in this environment right now?
So, our focus is really helping owners maintain the integrity of their built environment.
Okay.
That's the words people use these days. But, what goes into that is really just making sure the structure is done right. So the way we think about things is when a client calls, there's always a problem with a system. It's a roof system or a window system, a grading and drainage system. Mm-hmm. And so we hire independent experts along with the client to figure out, what the scope of the issue is whether or not the work comports with the contract documents and the promises made by the folks responsible for building it. And then we give clients options on how to solve their problems. So the biggest thing we see is the most calls I get, I would say, are our air conditioning system. In this massive building doesn't work like it's supposed to, and we've given the mechanical engineer 8 chances to come out to fix it. In that case, typically what happens is, since everything's already been built, the mechanical engineer, typically operating underneath the architect, they can't really fix something that's already been installed and worked, and millions of dollars, to fabricate it, to install it. And so, the most merciful thing an owner can do really is to say, okay, it's clear that you can't fix this. We're going to file a lawsuit, and your liability insurance that your owner paid for as a pass through, we're going to invoke that. And the best way to do that is to file a lawsuit, because then the liability carrier for the responsible parties, in this example, that just happens to be a mechanical engineer, the insurance company steps up, and that creates a pretty cool dynamic, because now the insurance company for the responsible party has an obligation to investigate and to pay insurance money for covered losses for the responsible party, to make the owner whole and to protect the responsible party's assets. And so, people don't like to do that. People don't like conflict, but it really is the easiest path to resolution when there's an issue that's of a magnitude that merits it.
So to that point, Mark, what are some of I guess, like in this way, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need lawsuits. You wouldn't have to go to court for this kind of thing. But sometimes you got to, just because when parties acting not in good faith, or just being reluctant, or dragging their feet, or just bad actors. As if I got somebody watching this, and you got an owner developer watching this, and they're thinking, they've got some sort of issue, or not even an issue. What are some of the sort of best practices you think should people think about, as far as what documentation, what process, what due diligence would you say the owner or developer should be doing, respects to even prevent this from happening in the first place?
Right. Well, the first idea is to get a team together who knows what they're doing, with a superintendent who is there the entire project, so that there's an institutional knowledge about what happened at the beginning. A lot of times general contractors will have to cycle different superintendents on and off a project, which is not optimum. Because there's no real historical knowledge about what's gone on, and how can you make good decisions about the future if you don't know exactly what happened in the past? Sometimes. And so also too, I need to dissuade your listeners of a notion. You had mentioned bad actors. Nobody intends to build something that doesn't work, or that doesn't comport with contract documents. Stuff happens, man. And sometimes your subcontractor didn't put in flashing on the entire west wall of a new hospital. Well, that happens. It happens. Maybe the brick ties aren't done like you hope they should be, or the weeps are all blocked up so that the envelope can't function properly. But nobody means to do that, really. So, but as far as preparation, hire a team that that you trust. Don't have too many new people working, number one. But from an owner's perspective, there's something that we call a post-construction quality audit. And I'm not talking about a punch list. I'm not talking about punch list stuff. I'm talking about a quality audit of the construction by an independent third party, to see if it comports with what was promised, and the money that was paid. There's even an ebook available. You can Google post-construction quality audit. There's an ebook available on my law firm website at gravely.law that you can download for free.
Great.
And everybody can have Christmas dinner conversations. but as far as making sure your investment has been done correctly from an owner's standpoint, there's elements of trust, with the design folks. A lot of the owners that I represent, they don't want to have to file a lawsuit. They really don't. They've been fishing with people, they don't, and they say, well, we have such a good relationship with, XYZ. And, remember, when I get called, it's not because there's a paint problem that's a color matching issue. I mean, there's a major multi-million-dollar issue.
Yeah.
And what I tell my owners is, if you have such a good relationship with them, they won't mind helping you access their liability insurance that you already paid for.
Yeah.
So, most of the time, market forces prevail. And that's really what we're talking about. Hold people to what they're responsible for, to what they've been paid for. And if everybody just does what they're supposed to, things usually end up okay.
So obviously, Mark, you've been operating in the state of Texas for a long time. And Texas being one of the states in the country that has anti-indemnity statutes respects to policies, or how you structure transfer risk between owner of the GC down to the sub. And to work around that, the solutions has been obviously is lots to use the wrap-ups, whether it be the owner-controlled insurance programs or the contractor-controlled insurance programs. Could you maybe talk a little bit? I assume you've probably been involved with some litigation that's been with wrap-ups versus non-wrap-ups.
Yeah. I'll just tell you, I'm not a fan of them. There's an illusion that something really is owner controlled.
Okay.
And, I'm involved in a couple now, really large ones. And it's not what people, it's not the bill of goods people were sold from the owner's standpoint.
Okay.
I've got situations where, a GC refuses under the policy to fix what needs to be fixed. And remember, when you wade into these policies, what you're doing is you're combining the complexity and the duties of your standard construction contract with the complexity of the most litigated documents on the planet, which are insurance policies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, there's more lawsuits filed about over insurance policies than any other, document. That's a ton of litigation. And so if you want to complicate your life, put a construction contract, performance standards, combine those with an insurance policy that means that some things one day and may mean something different the next day. If you combine all that, it's just one big confusing mess. And I'm not a fan of them. And the owners that I represent in the beginning think it's a great idea. But, when something goes south, who was it? Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan till you get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when there's a problem on a large project that has a rep, it's headaches for the owner. I don't recommend it.
Okay. Interesting. That's an interesting point. So, Mark, I'm curious. We've probably seen in my line of work, we've seen a lot of technology being sort of brought to the table with respects to third-party vendors that are on job sites and, like, say, recording the course of construction and doing 360 imagery. I mean, from your perspective, as you think about a trial attorney, and you think about what you've seen and going in the future, things like recording the job during course of construction. I mean, do you see that as being beneficial as far as help you pinpoint where the problem is?
Of course, it's good for everybody because it records what actually is happening. And so you don't have to depend on somebody's memory. We've got a case right now where a large project was built and there were, a lot of rain days. And the contractor, like they should, they took pictures of the site, maybe videos to document the rain days because they had rain day allowances in the contract. And so so now the lawsuit we happen to be involved in is a large component of it is the foundation is cracking now. And, we ask ourselves, well, what's causing this, right? Since I've got the burden of proof, I represent the owner, I have to figure out, or the experts figure out what's causing this. And because we have all that documentation and evidence of moisture on the slab, we now know that the general contractor allowed the slab to stay wet longer than it should. It didn't dry out like it should. And our experts believe that led to most of the cracking that is, getting the owners or making the owner's investment decrease in value. And it's going to cost a ton of money to repair. So we wouldn't have those, but for photos of the rain days.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of that. Another technology that can be used is the FLIR cameras. When you've got a leak somewhere, those can be helpful. They're a little hard to use. They always have to be calibrated correctly. And moisture meters, the old handy dandy moisture meter. But as far as what we see the most of is BIM used on projects, and it's kind of gone south. Okay. Because the folks who are operating it, it's kind of a new gee whiz, kind of a cool thing. It's charming, it's all colorful, and you get to see where everything goes. But if it's not used correctly and the owner is promised, efficiencies from it, it can just cause bigger problems. And I've seen some projects where it's used, very well. As usual, it depends on whose hand the hammer is in as to how well the job gets done.
Fair enough. So obviously, the audience, if anybody has a specific question you'd like to ask of Marc, please go ahead and submit it through the process. I'd love to bring any of your questions you have directly to Marc. And to that point, Marc, I may want to maybe pivot a little bit because when you and I first met, now we learned about your background. But one of the things I'm really kind of fascinated about is that you actually have written a book. And for people who didn't necessarily see that, the title of the book deals with America's infrastructure. And it's called specifically Reframing America's Infrastructure, A Ruins to Renaissance Playbook. And Kirkus gave us a pretty favorable review of the book in the sense called it a thoroughly researched technical survey, which more than succeeds in making its argument that the future of America depends on the decisions we make today. And Marc, to kind of set the stage, I've had the benefit in my life. I've best friend was FM Global. I've traveled a lot around the country, a lot of the world, internationally. And especially in the past 15, 20 years, obviously I've seen some beautiful, brand new airports being built all around the country, rail infrastructure. You go to Asia, everything's it's rather immaculate. Singapore, just the infrastructure you have in place. And then fast forward to now, in America, at least, it's rather kind of disheartening sometimes. You go to some airports that look like they belong to a third world nation, or drive around Dallas. I'm saying I'm going over potholes left and right everywhere. And I think people don't necessarily understand. You look at your basic macroeconomics as far as an economy is concerned. If you can improve the infrastructure and make it more efficient, there are things move faster, people move faster. That helps grow the economy. And I think we're seeing that the infrastructure of this country has been holding us back, whether it be high capacity transmission lines, water lines, new sewer lines. You name it. I think a lot of this has been sort of neglected over the years, and now I think we're maybe starting to see maybe an impetus based upon the recent passage through Congress Infrastructure Act. Obviously, Marc, I'd love to get you to opine as far as how'd you come to the idea to write this book, and what was sort of the motivating factors?
Well, this is the kind of thing that happens when I have too much free time on my hands. And so most of it was done during COVID, but my idea was, I never wanted to be a lawyer that did construction and insurance stuff growing up. But, I wanted to be a jet pilot, but that was never going to happen. And I certainly couldn't play NBA basketball.
Yeah.
I learned when I was about 16 that wasn't going to happen. And so, since I'm in the business of it, it's what I know, and I thought, I've got some pretty cool things to say. I think I've got some good examples, and there wasn't a book out there like it.
Okay.
And so the book is, it's in 3 parts. The first part talks about the history of infrastructure. I'm a bit of a history buff. So the history of infrastructure and how I believe it defines a lot of civilizations. When you're growing up, you think about the pyramids, you think about the Roman bridges that some of which are still standing today. They're so well constructed.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman, for example, recipe for concrete, a lot of which is, still in use, that was poured a long time ago.
Oh, good point.
And so there's many examples of infrastructure from South America, the eras in the past, Europe, China, of course, and so it's just important. It occurred to me how important it was to a society and for a society to be able to function. Some great examples of that are our interstate highway system that is patterned largely after the German Autobahn that was built to benefit the U.S., but it took an act of Congress to get that project started.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, you kind of think, well, wasn't it obvious that we need an interstate highway system? Well, it took somebody with some vision to make it happen. And so the book talks a little bit about the history of infrastructure, some examples here in the United States of how infrastructure has been a huge benefit to us. Our park system, our waterways are part of the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the founders even commented, I think it was George Washington, that even commented on the wonderful, waterways and the fact that the Great Mississippi has helped transact, a lot of business for people over the years.
Absolutely.
And so the second part of the book, according to Kirkus, contains an unnerving number of examples of failure of some of the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to use a lot of fact-based examples of how infrastructure is failing, where it's failing, why it's failing, be it design problems, construction issues. And it happens a lot more than, people would think.
Yeah.
It's not something people like to talk about.
And Mark, I've even add to that point. Recently, people maybe watching this right now are in Houston. I mean, Houston had to go through a water notice recently because that goes back to the failing infrastructure of the water utility.
That's right. I mean, that's not cool. And so
no.
We don't want stuff like that.
No.
And so that's a big part of it. And then there's examples from all around Flint, Michigan, and the water problems they're having up there. I mean, that's fundamental, basic civilization, stuff that we've got works. And so the final part of the book talks about some things that China's doing. China's made a tremendous investment in their infrastructure, and there's a few things we could learn from how the Chinese government has conducted, their infrastructure building program. And it's not just infrastructure in their country; they're building and connecting themselves to trading partners all across Asia and Europe, and even into Africa.
Yeah, and that's a great part, Mark. There was a book recently I read, Daniel Jorgen, who's kind of the guru of power, and covered the oil and gas community for years. And he wrote a book recently, and he talked about, there's a push obviously for green energy, and solar, wind, but there's issues in respects to how far you can, power can go on a power line to go from one part of the country to the next. And so that unto itself, with the Chinese are, almost gobbling up all the high capacity transmission lines to help allow the transfer of energy from one part of the country to the next. And if us to do that unto itself is going to be a major effort. If we really want to have green energy in a stable energy grid, having the ability to move energy from one part of the country to the next efficiently, especially being wind or solar power, is going to require higher transmission lines. And that in itself is a pretty massive undertaking.
It is, and that's one of 57 moving parts that comprise our infrastructure. There's there's the cybersecurity portion of it. There's the electrical grid that we've all heard so much about, here in Texas. But one thing that's interesting, when the Chinese government wants to build a high-speed rail, they just do it because they own all the land in China. And so everybody's looking forward to high-speed rail here in Texas, but there's property rights that have to be dealt with. It's not comfortable to talk about, but
sure.
People have owned family farms and ranches for a long time, and Texans are pretty protective of their property rights.
Amen to that.
That's a real contrast in what's happening.
Sure. So, Mark, what would you say is hopefully your recipe for, I guess, for success for America's improvement of its infrastructure?
Well, we need visionaries. When you think about American infrastructure, you think about the Golden Gate Bridge, and maybe the Empire State Building. You know how old those things are?
Pretty old.
It's time for a new American Renaissance, and that's what I call for in the book, because we've certainly got the wherewithal. We've got talented designers, we've got talented engineers, general contractors that can build anything that anyone else can build. But it just takes focus. One of the cool things about the infrastructure bill is that it allows local counties and localities to decide what they're going to spend a large portion of the money on. And so, for example, there's some counties, large counties in Texas here, that are getting $500 million to spend as they wish. And wow. I think that's pretty cool because local folks get to decide where they want to make their city or county better. And so that's one of the features of the new infrastructure bill that I think is pretty cool. And that we'll benefit from.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because I've had the pleasure of going and working with clients in Oklahoma City, and have been in Oklahoma City quite a bit over the years. And they have what's called a MAPS program, and the MAPS program is sort of how they levied an additional like a 1% sales tax on their current base tax, and the people in Oklahoma City have it's a communal sort of buy-in as far as how they're going to. There's lots of debates and conversations, and how they just sort of group think about how they're going to deploy that additional resources. And the MAPS program has gone through a couple of different versions. I think they're on MAPS 5 now, whether it be they're putting light rail in, or the conference convention center, or whatever the case may be. But the community has a tie-in to say how they're going to take these, improve their or improve the organization. I say improve the infrastructure, their community, and and for a state that's pretty trying too much in politics, but pretty deep red. That may be sort of anti-governmental, but that's pretty impressive that they're willing to, sort of buy into the improvement of their neighborhoods and their community.
It is, I mean, there's really nothing that the American people can't do if we work together. And, anybody that works for a living wants to pay less taxes.
Sure.
And they want the taxes that we pay, I've always thought, to be spent efficiently and effectively. But there's a few things that our government taxes us for that I think we all can get behind. Our military is one of them.
Sure.
It's important that we have a strong military, but our infrastructure needs to be a priority just as big as that. And the aggregate effect of the taxes paid by Americans and American business is a powerful thing. I just hope people can get past politics and we can start the hammer swinging.
Amen to that.
And get some stuff.
Good. Mark, I'll be cognizant of your time, so I'm going to wrap up here. My standard questions kind of get a little beyond the lawyer and the man. So Mark, when you're not working, what are you doing?
I like to read. Hang out with my family, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Nothing too interesting.
Are you like nonfiction, fiction? Do you have a preference as far as you like to read?
Yeah, I don't read fiction anymore. Okay. I did, growing up. I try to focus on biographies and history.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I'm reading a book on the Stoics.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And respects to, if you have the ability to go travel, what are your top spots? Where you want to
go? We go to Aspen a lot.
Okay.
We go to Aspen. We go to New York. And LA from time to time. Santa Barbara's pretty nice.
No, it's very nice out there for sure. My wife and I, we had the pleasure of having a 25th wedding anniversary. We went down to the Montage, Laguna Beach in California back in May. Had a beautiful time. It was wonderful. So, and as far as, I'm headed to Breckenridge late January, early February. So I'm looking forward to get some time on the slopes by then. So,
all right.
Yeah. So obviously, Mark, greatly appreciate your time. This has been very well information. I hope everybody in the audience, if you have an interest, want to follow up or have an issue, you can reach out to Marc Gravely at Gravely PC. And obviously, your book is available on Amazon, where at least you buy books. I've had the pleasure of having a copy. I've been digging into it, and it's been pretty fascinating. I'm enjoying the read, and I look forward to getting to the end of it. So, Mark, I'll let you go, but once again, Mark, thank you so much for your time and your effort.
Great. Thanks.
We'll talk soon. Okay.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So everybody, hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you find it informative. Like always, if there's a certain topic or individual you want me to cover in these episodes, I'm more than happy to do it. Please reach out to me directly. Hey, if you want to be on the show, let me know. We'll figure something out. Or if you have any suggestions, I'd be always happy to take it. Again, this is my name, Brian Hunt, and this has been a Risk On, Risk Off. Hope you guys have enjoyed a wonderful holiday season, and we'll talk to you in January. Bye-bye.